Alright, so in the previous tutorial we have seen how we can generalize this error handling by using middleware, and now let's see how we can improve this further. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we need some sort of a intermediary which is known as global error handler to catch all of these errors and handle those errors in a more generic fashion. So currently I have implemented this structure, which is quite okay, but I think it's better to define an explicit global error handler script. Then later on we can improve that to handle more errors. Otherwise this code will be quite long and our readability will be drops. So it is not quite a best practice. Therefore let's define another utility function. I think this is the first utility function that we are going to define to handle errors. So therefore I will create another folder called errors, and I need another file called let's say global error handler. Right. So this will basically handle all the necessary errors for us. So what I have to do is basically move this entire code to this global error handler section. Then later on we can improve that further. So I will cut everything like this and go to this file and paste it like that. But here again this is just a plain function, so other files doesn't aware of that this function definition. Therefore we need to export this as a module. So let's say module.exports equals to this function. So then this error handler can be import to our app.js. So let's quickly import that. So let's say const global error handler require let's say utils an error in global error handler, and this global error handler can be used over here like that. Right, now you can see there is no errors, and let's try that out. Yes, it is working correctly. So what happened is basically the same thing, only difference we have done was move this code to this specific script. Right. Then what I can do is I can generalize this error object construction, because as you can see here we are defining a lot of stuff, right? What is the error message, what is the status, what is the status code, and instead of defining like this, what I can do is basically I can create a class with these parameters. Then it will generate the necessary error object for me, right? Then later on when they encounter other errors, what we can do is basically we can improve that class to generate different objects. So this is known as object oriented programming, where we encapsulate certain functionalities to generate different objects. Right. So I will define another script which is known as apperror.js, and as I mentioned before, we need a class. So class is basically, it's like if you are familiar with object oriented programming, class is basically like a template, right, to define several objects. or to instantiate different objects through that class. Right, so this class will basically extend the existing error class, right? So extend basically says inherit whatever functions this class has to this app error class, right? So this is known as inheritance. So these are some sort of theories that comes under object-oriented programming. And once we have inherit these functions, what we can do is we can specify what is need to be constructed, right? So constructions will be done via constructor function, and this construction takes message and the status code, right? And you can even pass the status as well, but status can be generated via status code as well, right? Because if you look at the standard HTTP responses, you can see client responses start with 400 to 499, right? And the server errors start with 500 and 500 to 99, right? So based on the status code, we can declare what is the error status, right? So I will explain how this stuff happened, but all I wanted to do is just to give you a brief introduction, right? So now we have initialized our constructor, and since we have extended our app error with general error class, first we need to build, or first we need to construct our parent class. Otherwise error class doesn't know about the construction of the parent, right? So we can construct our parent by calling super function. So super will be basically called to this error parent class. So if you hover your mouse to this super class, yeah, let's say super, yeah, it point to error constructor, which is the construct of this error class. So this error constructor only takes a message. If you remember in our app.js, when we are constructing this new error object, we passed only this message. Likewise, when we are constructing our parent error class, we need to pass the message as its default parameter, right? Then error object will be constructed and it will be inherit to this specific class. So once this error object is inherited to this child app error class, it can be accessed using this function. So this basically defines whatever object constructed by this constructor, right? Basically the default object constructed by this class. Then we can define any other attributes, such as, let's say, status code, and let's say status, and let's say whether it is operational or not, things like that, right? And status code, basically we can assign like this, because we are passing it as a parameter, and status can be generated by looking at the status code, because if you look at this standard HTTP responses, all the client errors start with 4 and all the server errors start with 5. So if our status code start with 4, it is a failure to the client, and if our status code start with 5, it is basically a server error or an error that is invoked via our backend, right? So we can do that by simply looking at the status code. So I will use this backtick, and I will pass this as a integer. So status code is an integer, and if it gone through this backtick, it will automatically typecasted to a string. So any string can be start with, let's say, 4, then basically it's an client error, so our status will be failed. And if it is not start with an 4, which means it start with an 5, then it's a server side error, which means our status is error, right? So I will comment it like this. So 4 to 499, it's basically a client error, and 500 to 599, it's basically a server error, right? So this way we can automatically generate our status. Otherwise we have to pass our status as well, which is not quite necessary, right? And this is operational thing is I will explain then in a future tutorial. So this will basically helpful to do a production and development level error handling separation, right? So it won't be kind of difficult to understand this moment. So for now I will simply specify it as true, right? Right. Then we can even perform stack tracing as well. So it will be helpful for the developers to understand what happens exactly when it encounters this error. So you can simply call error object and call this capture stack trace function, and you need to pass the reference of this current error object, and need to pass the construct of this currently initiated object as well, right? So construct, right? So everything was done. We can once everything was done, we can simply export this module like this. Then we can simply import it to any of the script that is mentioned within our service. So let's say now I can import this app error class to this app.js. So let's say app error require utils error app error. Then we can basically construct this app error. So instead of using this manual way, I will remove this stuff. I will comment this stuff, let's say, and I will construct a new error object like this by using this app error class. So I must pass this message and status code as parameters to this class. Then it will automatically assign these values inside of that object. So this is the message, and this is the status code for our phone. Then I can simply remove this stuff, and yeah, let's try to invoke this again, and yeah, as we expected, it will generate the corresponding error for us, right? But yeah, it does look like it works, but it doesn't use our app error object. Yeah, simply because of we haven't defined this ERR over here, right? Instead of ERR, now we can define it as error. So this error object will be passed to this error handler global function, then all the errors will be handled over there. Right, now if I invoke this function or route again, yeah, it works as we expected. So it says route is not defined. So all the construction of this error handler object will be happened over here, and that error will be globally handled through this global error handler function, Right, so that's how we can generalize this error handling mechanism, and the next tutorial, let's see how to handle further errors in our backend. Alright, so thank you.